Good morning and welcome to the Eastern Mediterranean Times. I'm your host, Martin Mont.
And I'm your host, Josh Volitke.
Alright, jumping right into it. The Italian government playing blame games as immigration problems surge.
Yes, the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, has said that she's been very disappointed with the outcomes so far on immigration policy, seeing these massive spikes in immigration. Just looking at from past year's data to right now, it's nearly doubled the amount of migrants that have entered Italy. And especially with the Lampedusa case of over 8,000 migrants in a matter of 3 days entering this very small island. So, in response, the Italian government has been pushing criticism onto the European Union and onto Germany. With the EU, they've been dismissing what they've done so far as not enough to support Italy in this time of need. Whereas with Germany, Germany has recently started to fund some charitable organizations that are dealing with rescuing migrants on the high seas. And Italy is saying that that is a step too far.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these problems exacerbated by climate events such as earthquake in Morocco, earthquake in Turkey earlier this year, and the flooding that happened both in Greece and Libya. So turning back to Libya, the aftermath of that flooding has also been really devastating. Not only is the Italian government mad, but the Libyan government doesn't really have a structure to handle this. The Libyan government, as we mentioned last week in our podcast, is split between two different kind of dueling coalitions, and they're not able to actually form a consolidated effort to rebuild the country after the flooding.
Yeah, the authoritarian government that's in control of the region that was most hit by Storm Daniel and the flooding has really cracked down on people protesting about the disaster and about the government's inability to preempt and subsequently respond to the catastrophic floods. So this will be a real test for both the conflicting governments in Libya as they seek to rally people to their causes.
Yeah, and the inverse reaction of this is that the civil unrest and how the government has handled that unrest has actually hurt aid workers trying to get into the country, because the government has shut down a lot of urban centers, and that's where the aid groups are actually manning their operations from. So aid groups from Europe saying this is not a helpful move by the government.
Yes.
The other duality here is that not only does the government need to rebuild the political and infrastructure of the country, they also need to rebuild the monetary infrastructure. We had a lot of small businesses destroyed, trade went down, the actual people living in the country, they don't have the money that they need to stimulate the growth that's required to rebuild these structures. So trying to both bolster the industrial side of the country while bolstering the kind of private monetary side of the country is going to be a struggle for a splintered government.
Indeed.
I also want to point out, last week when we covered Libya, the estimated death toll was 20,000 people, but that number has been revised to 3,900 people this week. So death toll has gone down, except there's an asterisk on this, because last week the aid groups had reported 20,000 likely deaths. This week it's lower, but that could be due to miscalculations, people that they can't find.
Yes.
So, moving on to a disgraced U.S. senator's corruption charges could be tied to an Egyptian arms deal. Senator Robert Mendez on Friday was indicted for corruption scandals. The FBI believes that he's involved in fraud, and they found gold bars and cash in his house. Al Jazeera reporting today that those could be linked to Egypt.
Yes, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gold, checks, and cash were found in Senator Robert Mendez's home, and he is a pretty influential figure in Washington,
Absolutely.
being the former chair of the Foreign Relations Committee.
He's lobbied, he's bribed,
Yes.
And again, these are alleged allegations. He denies these allegations,
Yes.
but they could be massive. Just last week, the Biden administration finally let $235 million of military aid money go to Egypt, Congress has been working to block that. They've been blocking the $1.3 billion that normally go to Egypt. Mendes has been in staunch opposition to that blockage.
Yeah, he's been a proponent of pushing for even more aid to Egypt.
Yeah, so while his innocence is until he's proven guilty, we will have to let the people of New Jersey decide whether he stays or not.
Yes.
And now moving back to our last story, the Cyprus intelligence services have been closely monitoring migrants' online interactions and have created a blacklist for migrants who they believe could be involved with terror networks. Now, they're using Instagram posts, Facebook posts, any kind of metadata they can get online, and consolidating that into a blacklist that they define as a terrorist blacklist.
Yes, well, this brings questions about online privacy concerns, in which governments seem to have no real limitations in accessing people's personal information online. And additionally, one has to think about how Cyprus is defining these flags on people. And considering that the police have not really disclosed any of this information, transparency concerns are definitely put into the mix.
Absolutely, and Cyprus has been one of the many countries in the Eastern Med that struggled with migration this year and in the past, and any kind of relief that their government can edge out of this will be helpful to them in their geopolitical problems in the upcoming months. This has been the Eastern Mediterranean Times podcast. I'm your host, Martin Mont.
And I'm your host, Joshua Lutke.
In coordination with the Eastern Mediterranean Institute in Boston and Emmanuel College, Boston. Have a wonderful week.